So, hello everybody. 1 second, we are soon there. Mhm. I just hear me several times. I need to fix that because I have actually added a new channel, which is on Substack. Checking it right now, but it seems to work. So let's take a look how that actually works out. So today we want to talk about leadership. Leadership is a quite interesting topic, to be honest, and it is all about a specific type of person you could be in relation to your followers, because that is actually what it is. And I want to describe or explain that in specific today, because that is actually quite interesting thing. And for that, I want to go through some stuff and show it to you. And feel free to let me know what you think, and if you have questions or feedback or something like that. And in a second, I'm probably even be able to show what I want to show. Second, window aligning teams. That is this one. And here we are in that moment. Okay, that is still a little bit. There we are. Okay, so I have still the chat inside. So let me know if you have any questions there, then we can go through that one. And I quickly want to describe a little bit the difference between two major things when we're talking about leadership, right? So because people see two things. First of all, we have the leader. This is what we want to talk about today, the type of person, right? On the other hand, we have the manager. So those two things, I give it actually a different color, not green. Actually, let's take blue in this case, and green one because that's actually the goal. So we know it. That's the colors we want to talk about. So what's the actual difference between those two types of persons? And what I can actually say about those kind of things is that the right hand side thing is more about actually managing things. Well, it's obvious, right? But what means managing? So it means to do the actual decision making things, defining the boundaries, making sure that you have enough resources to actually do that. Define the requirements, so the hard things, so the business requirements, those kind of things. This is what the manager is doing. The manager is taking care of the headcount in a team. It's making sure that you have enough people to actually work on those kind of things. That is what the manager is doing. The manager is a role. So that is, I think, very important to understand. So make a side note, that is a role. That is a little bit different to what the manager actually is. Sorry, the leader. The leader is not really a role. So many people say, I have a leadership role. So it sounds great, but what is a leader? A leader is a person who leads people. That is not really a role. That is a relation to the people you shall lead. So it describes a relation. So let's take this one, and that is a relation. That means you lead these people, which does have some requirements to actually be able to lead people, which is being worth following. That's one of the big topics I have from my side, where I can talk about this, right? Is are you actually worth being followed by your followers? So you, as a leader, you actually have the relation is to the followers, who can be team leads, colleagues, whoever is actually following you. So that is a relation. In this case, it's actually a two-sided relation. And the manager can have relations to people. There are a lot of managers who actually don't have any relations to any people because they are responsible for physical things. Can happen as well. So the manager is not necessarily a person who is doing anything with people. the leader is. The leader is mainly doing with people because you don't lead machines or something like that. You manage machines. You manage Kubernetes clusters. You manage code bases, those kind of things, right? But you don't lead those kind of things. You lead people. That's the first big difference. So it's not a role, it's a relation. That's the very first thing. Let me quickly take a look. So the manager assigns tasks, while the leader, you can be both at the same time. Just to be clear about that, that doesn't mean you can't be both at the same time, but you would be hired to be a manager. But it would be great if you would have leadership qualities, so the people would follow you to actually get the stuff done you should do as a manager, right? And so of course we set as a manager goals, because we need to add the technical goals, the business goals. But then we have a mission. The mission is to get to this goal. And to get to this goal, we need to be a leader who is leading the people to this goal, which requires that those people are actually following us and they can follow us. So it's beneficial that you are actually both at the same time, because that they actually can follow us requires that you have enough resources to do that, and you have enough, let's say, headcounts to do that, enough developers and enough competent developers. We had that now on LinkedIn quite often in the last days, the discussion again about soft and hard skills and how important it actually is that you can do something in order to push your team forward in terms of hard skills. And that is correct. You actually need this, right? This is very important. Otherwise, your team can't move. So at least some people in your team needs to be able to make it possible to move forward. I would go into that one specifically as a bonus, because I have that very often in mentoring sessions where this is something very interesting, where we can talk about how to actually make this happen, and how you can actually include juniors even, which is very often a engineering manager and tech leader problem, how to actually integrate junior developers into a team and make them get into speed, right? And I want to talk about that in the end as a bonus. But let's go ahead. So the next thing is managers are reactive, which means that managers, when you are in, or when you wear the head of a manager, you actually see a lot of statistics. You see a lot of hard problems. Like, we have that budget, we have that timeline given by some other instance, and we need to actually fulfill that. That is not what the leader actually cares about in that moment. That was what the manager then again cares about. And that is how you actually you are very reactive as a manager. It's not like you are very proactive, because first of all, you try to make these things happen, but you react on things which are pretty much circumstantial from outside. As a leadership person, it's a little different. Of course, you react as well, because you need to, well, this is the same circumstances, right? But your main action is to be proactive. So you stand up and you try your best to lead the people on a mission, on this journey towards that goal, in order to make a transition from A to B. So we're coming now to another interesting point, which is then making the transition. Let's call it like this. Some point in time, I really need to have another tool for that, but that's actually the tool I use in daily business. So we have A and B. So the idea is that we are at A, or start at A, and we want to get to B, right? And as a leader, you have a mission to get from A to B. In this case, we need that one. This is what we want to be. And actually, ideally, it's like that. So we learn something, we get better, we actually do something which is better for us. So of course, it can be ending like this or like this, but just from the quality aspect. So for example, we want to get a product out, and in the same moment, we want to try to become better in rolling out new features while we releasing that, because on the last release, we had problems releasing things. So as a manager, that is more a requirement thing, a reactive thing, while it's a proactive thing as a leadership person to push people to get that done. And in order to get that done, we need to make sure that the people actually are on this mission and want to be part of that mission. So this mission is a little story. So that's the next thing. So that is a story. And why I say story. The easiest way to pack things and convince people to follow you on whatever journey is the story. So there's this story. So the story of stories that everyone on this planet understands. So that's the typical hero's journey, sometimes called. So it's the typical 3x structures. So you are here. That's the problematic state. Then you get to the apex, which is then the act 2, and you get to the solution, which is ideally where you want to get. This is act 3. B, in our case, mission's goal. That's a short story, and that can be in an iterative way, so we can have multiple stories and just do that in that way. I don't refer now to any Scrum or something like that when we take for story points or something like that. I'm really talking about stories we human understand. And that is actually quite easy to get people onto such journeys. Because when we do those journey things, people can imagine themselves as protagonists on this journey, which means you include them. That is the first step to let them take ownership. If they are not protagonists on that story, they are guests there. They are basically viewers from outside. They are more part of the audience in that story. And if you have that, especially in your team, so you imagine you are a team lead now, or you have a team lead, and you go into this room and you have your 5 people sitting there and you come up with a new idea. You are the only one talking. No one is actually responding. And you try to get the people to give some feedback about that. That is a sign, if it's really silent, that no one really feels part of that story. So they are not involved in that story. So you need to learn how to narrate stories. Because that is actually it. So because it is extremely compatible with how we human work, how our brains are wired for ages, actually. So that is one tip I can give that works actually quite well. It's actually the same in sales. It's the same in marketing. Everywhere stories. Influencers do stories. Thought leaders do stories. Everyone do stories. So do that as a leadership person as well to convince people to follow you on that journey, right? It is a journey, right? So we can actually call that as well a journey. A small one. Sometimes just a day. Sometimes maybe an hour. Sometimes a week. Doesn't matter. It is from A to B. And it can have sub-stories. So it is up to you how you actually then define that, but you need to get to this point. That is extremely important. Then let's get to the next point. We had that one, ensure that he understands the role. Exactly. So we have roles in a team, which means that the leadership person is, of course, the person who tells the story, who pushes people forward, who creates the vision for the mission. The vision is that one, actually. That is, we can project ourselves as a team into the future to that descriptive point, to that declaration. This is what we want to have. This is where we want to be. This will be better than it is right now because we have pulled it a little up. So there must be value, extremely important. Here behind that must be value. That is important. Behind B, must be interesting for the people to actually follow and get this value. So they need to be feeling better about the current state when they actually get there. So otherwise, it's a little bit like, why do we need to get there? It doesn't really make sense to go there. Yeah, you know what I mean. So that is the point. So value must be inside there as well. Then let's quickly take a look. So then the why. Sorry, the why. The next thing is, why should we get there? Of course, value, but there must be a sense for the mission. So we have a why. A why is, of course, overarching and very important for everything we do in our entire business. But the why for this A to B transition is extremely important. So why should we go there as a team? And why should I participate? And why should I, as a stakeholder in this team, as a part, as a protagonist, should put my time and effort, aka ownership or taking ownership, and move forward. So it must have a reason, a purpose, a why. That is extremely important. So you, as a leadership person, must be able to explain this why to people. They follow you because you lead them through this journey, through this story, to a point where there's purpose and value. Okay? That is important. That makes you worth following, which means that makes actually those followers followers. That is how influencers work. This is how content creators work. This is how leadership persons in business should work. Because what you actually do is nothing else than giving this idea of people are first watching, then they get a sense of what there is, and then you create the demand for this person to embark on this journey, to be part and not left behind. You will see that when the first person want to embark on this journey, so the resistance is breaking. We're coming to the resistance as next, but if resistance then is breaking, and you overcome resistance with the first person, you normally have resistance for, especially when you start to do that the first time with your team, you will see a lot of resistance, especially when you are not very good yet in describing those things because you haven't never trained that really, right? You will see a lot of people finding reasons to question the why and the value. So we could do something different. Let's take a tech stack as an example. We could just use or stay with our tech stack if you do a migration. So you want to integrate something new as a leadership person, as a management person, because you see something is extremely outdated and we need to move. But there are still these two engineers who really want to stay with the old solution, right? But you need to go. There maybe are some circumstances. So you need to convince the people to go that route together with you. And once you see, that's the problem. When people see, let's say in a team, the more silent people see that, hey, there are 2 or 3 very influential people, stakeholders in that team, some people who are senior level, like those kind of people, right? Say, I'm not convinced. And then this spreads a little bit, but it does it in the other direction as well. So as soon as you get the people to be convinced about the why, the value, the story, and why we should do that, then it's actually better on the other side. And yes, the journey can be a little, let's say, if it's a longer journey like a migration, it can be a little bumpy road, right? But after that, it's better. If you are able to manage this, you will see that the ice is breaking. And as soon as one of these influential persons turns their opinion and actually starts to you can do that. I had that so often. It actually works quite well. Then you see that the entire team's eyes there is breaking, and the people suddenly start to talk. And this talking, so when you see the people who were silent, becoming now a little louder, they speak up, or they even they just acknowledge, or they just confirm and just nodding, then you see you are on the right track. You already have done the very basics. Of course, you don't need to do that every time when you are embarking on a new journey, because if you're used to it and it's always the same people, then of course you don't need to do all this gymnastics every time, because the team is used to work together with you. But that is, of course, not the case in the very beginning. You need to find, a way to work together, and that is actually how you can do that. But now I want to talk about the resistance part. So we have these 2 little things. So we have now put a little bit of emotion in, value, those kind of things which are closer to your heart. And as I said, we're talking about the leadership role, which is a relation to the followers, and not so much the actual management role, which you probably have as well as a physical role, right, in the company. That's the actual contract you have. So you need to do some things, and for this you do that. Actually, that is the leadership idea. And when you do that, and I already basically scratched that topic, we will get into something more serious, and that is one of the probably the most serious thing I know is resistance. Capital R, resistance. That is something which every person on this planet every human does have this. This is this little inner voice telling you, actually, you don't need to do this. You don't need to stand up today. You were successful yesterday. You don't need to do that today. This will not bring the value. This is not really worth. That is not a good purpose. Those kind of things. Oftentimes, it's maybe not a good purpose, maybe reality, but resistance is working, no matter if it's the case or not, to basically avoid the change. So it tries to make that impossible, right? It tries to create a reason to not embark on the journey. And it's the very same thing when you basically go and you want to do some workouts, right? You want to lose weight. You want to get into a new job. You want to learn something new. You want to build your app or something like that. There is a lot of resistance in the beginning, especially in the beginning, because that is where the biggest change actually happens. You start a new journey. So the bigger this potential is where you go to, the bigger the resistance is. And this is the reason why there's a counterpart, which is the Muse. I call it the Muse because I'm a big fan of Stephen Pressfield, and he was describing it as the Muse. Actually, he wasn't taking it from the Greeks, but this is the other voice we have, which leads us to the potential we can have. So what we have here is potential. And these both things are, in a way or another, connected to each other. So like this. Come, do, please. Thanks. Okay. So we have the Muse, and the Muse is connected to potential, and the resistance tries to keep us away from the potential. That's the thing. It tries to do everything that we don't get there. This potential means we need to change. It means we will change, and we will be somewhere different. It's simply doing that. We don't need to take care why it's doing that, but it's doing that in our entire life, no matter what you do. And this basically part of this story as well when you're having a leadership thing. So you come into this room, there are the 5 teams, the 5 people, the 10 people, the 20 people, and you will see people with resistance. It is very unlikely that no one, maybe if you go on an incentive or a hike together with the company, everyone's still, yay, great, there's no resistance, maybe. But even then, there are some people, oh, I don't want to go on a hike. Well, it is always there. So always some resistance. And especially when there is a lot of things that will change. Tech stack, right? We start to deploy things differently. Those kind of things are very, very, or people are very resistant. So you need to overcome that resistance and try to connect the people to the Muse, which is intrinsic motivation. So that's another word for, let's say, easier to describe as intrinsic motivation. So that is not discipline, that is intrinsic motivation. That is motivation from outside, but from inside you. So it is basically not from outside of you, but of your mind, but basically it is not yourself which is creating that, but this voice next to yourself, and is pulling you forward while the resistance is holding you back. So you are actually in between that as a leadership person, as a human being. So, and that same pattern happens in every one of your followers. And that is one of the reasons, for example, why so many influencers on YouTube, for example, ask you to like and subscribe. So why do they ask you to like and subscribe? Because you have a lot of resistance. You're just watching. You're just procrastinating there. So you already think, I'm already watching this. I need to like. Oh, this button is so far away. Okay, but this is the reason why people actually tell you, oh, you need to subscribe. And you think, I see you anyway in my feed. Those kind of things. This is resistance. And they try to motivate you. Basically by telling those things. And what you need to create is this intrinsic motivation. This means in each and every of your followers, you as a leadership person, to get to the mission, you need to create, and not really creating, but you need to, how can I put it? You can to, just saying, Kaloyan, just saying. It is, the plug is important. Resistant is mentioned, let's go. Plug the book. Exactly. It is The War of Art, that book here. You should read it. Ask me in the comments if you like to know more about that one. It's a very great book to understand these aspects on detail. And it's extremely important. And if you don't do that, I can't help you, right? So that's the very basics. You need to understand them. So the Muse and the intrinsic motivation are extremely important to understand. You need to infuse that in each and every of these persons. You actually and yourself. So you need to have that as a prerequisite. If the people don't see the intrinsic motivation in you, it is very unlikely that it will be infused in there as well. So that is the only way. And when does resistance actually fall? Is as soon as you start the journey. So it is important to understand that resistance is heavy in the moment before the change, but not when you actually embark on the journey. Of course, you will have every day a little bit new resistance. It will never fade away, but it is strongest when the stakes are higher, especially in the beginning and in the end. So imagine you have something for one day. There, it doesn't really matter, right? So you just do these kind of things. It's fine. You will get to the point anyway. But if you do it for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, or month, you will see that you have a high motivation after the first resistance is gone. You start, you are basically somewhere here. And then on the end, suddenly you see a lot of resistance again as a leadership person. And you, as a leadership person, you need to make sure that people overcome this resistance again, and then you keep up intrinsic motivation. So I have talked about discipline. I give that another color now. Discipline is something else in my personal opinion. So there might be other people who see it differently. So the difference between discipline and intrinsic motivation is discipline is basically what you do. So discipline is based on your mindset, on virtues, and on habits. Discipline is actually pretty much a virtue you can have, right? It is a very, very well cultivated set of habits you have, a virtue. And discipline, you as a leader, you must have discipline. Discipline leads as well to, wait a second, credibility. Oh, first time I write it correct in the first. Okay, so credibility. Discipline and credibility are very close together. So if you have a lot of discipline and you can show discipline to your followers, you will get credibility. You need that in order to create discipline or evoke discipline in your followers, because they need to create the same habits. They need to follow the same ideas, and you need to be the example in that moment that this actually works. Yeah, you can't just expect that everyone in your team does have a baseline. That's the next thing we can talk about as well. Was writing about that some days ago. Is the baseline. So you need the discipline to keep the baseline, and that will create credibility. So that's actually a cycle, right? And why do you need that? Because this is not always there, because this isn't you. This is a voice from outside pulling you. Sometimes you listen to that, sometimes not. Sometimes you're simply not connected. And sometimes you are more connected or more prone to resistance. So you basically bounce between those two. And when you lean towards resistance, you need to have discipline to keep your baseline, which is actually then your credibility, that you don't fall to resistance and you move on your journey. That is what happens in our mind when we're thinking of effective leaders. That is, let's say, those high-performing teams, they do that already on a very regular level because they know each other. That, what I'm talking about today, is when you actually do it for the first time, you are a new role, or you try to implement something new, you should see these things in their elements, how those things play together. There might be different constellations, maybe, but this is how I know it and how it actually really works. Not only in leadership, it basically works everywhere, because you lead yourself as well. So if you want to lose weight, you need to lead yourself on this journey from A to B. A is 130 kilograms, B is 100 kilograms. Or let's keep it as 95 kilograms because it sounds better, right? It's a 2-digit thing. So that is a lot of resistance. That's the reason why so many people are overweight or obese, right? There's the resistance. And sometimes when it's too late, they suddenly hear the intrinsic motivation when they hear, oh, you have really like organ problems already, those kind of things. Then suddenly you are a little bit connected to the muse, but not very strong, and you still hear resistance. And you never build up discipline, and you never kept your baseline because you started to go for a walk, but then, Well, there was the next Netflix show, and you got sick one day, and it was raining outside, so there was no reason to go out, right? You didn't keep your baseline, so you didn't have credibility for yourself. The credibility just means self-confidence. That is your self-confidence. That's your credibility. So if you know you have your baseline, you have credibility. That's self-confidence because you are able to keep that. And now it's the interesting part. People, your followers, will see that. You either show up or you don't. You give up after half a year or you don't. Or if you fall and you can't do something, you disappear for some weeks and you return and you keep on doing, is still credible, right? It is not great, but it's credible. That's why so many people say you need to do things regularly and show up regularly to convince people that you are actually a credible person. And that is extremely important inside the context of teams, developer teams, and these kind of things. Because developer teams are actually just human beings. They have pretty specific hard skills, tech skills, right? This makes them special, those kind of people, specialists, right? But you need to lead them, and all these problems have nothing to do on day one with the tech skills. Starting the journey has nothing to do with tech skills. Because tech skills are managed by this role of you have as well. So you make sure that you have actually enough people budget to actually embark on that journey. It doesn't make sense to go on a journey when you know, oh, I need to do a very complex legacy system, 20 years old migration, and I have just hired 3 people from the bootcamp. Yeah, you failed as a manager. This had nothing to do with leader. You can be the best leader in world work, of course. You need to make sure that the requirements are already met in this area. This is your role. You need to make sure that this actually can work, right? But we'll come to that later. That's a little bit like there is a combination. You can do that a lot as well as a leader. Okay, but now stay with the actual topic. So, good. We were there. So we know now that we need to go from A to B. It is a journey, a story. It is a transition we do, and we have a why, a purpose for everyone in the team, and we need to, it's a mission for us. We have value on the end, so everyone will have something, which the reason why B is higher than A. So we need to gain something. It must be interesting, attracting, and inciting. And there must be potential. So the potential is there because that's actually part of meaning of life. So believe it or not, but the potential. So we are there in life because we are time-bound beings who can create something which is in potential, but not yet reality. But we can make that reality. It can be a sprint. It can be creating an app. It can be building a house or founding a family. It doesn't matter. There's much potential we can do. And the less we do, the less prone we are, or the more prone we are to resistance, the less potential we see. Until on some point in time, we are medically so unfit and psychologically so unfit that the only potential we have is to try to get out of there somehow. But we can't build anything anymore. We can't go to do anything anymore because we basically were in this downward spiral for too long. And that's actually why so many teams often totally stuck when they do things, because they did that as a team, because no one was actually leading them. And you as a leader, so just to understand now, to get a little bit understanding, you as a leader, you are primarily responsible for that, and in making sure that the people are connected to the muse, which is the creative power. Developers are creators. They need to create something. Most of the journeys are creating something. So let them be creative. I was talking today about the idea that you as a leader, you need to define the mission, right? You need to make clear where to go, why to go, but how is the ownership aspect. Now we go to the ownership, which is a new thing. Let's find another color. Let's make it black. Ownership is the next thing. So people need to have ownership. What is ownership? So ownership is when people say it's actually mine, even though it's physically not mine, but it is mine. So I want to take care that this will work because I am emotionally bonded to this, whatever I do there in that journey, B in that case. So of course, it can be, of course, in A already and B still. So you want to own this process. People say, you need to own this process, right? So people say, as a manager, I say you own the process. That doesn't work. As a manager, the guy up here doesn't tell anyone to take ownership. You have accountability for something, but you don't have ownership and you don't have basically responsibility granted by someone. You take it, which means ownership is something that only the actual person can take. And the person will only take it when there is enough intrinsic motivation to do so. And on some days, of course, discipline. You cycle again, right? So that is an intrinsically infused thing. And you as a leader, you need to make sure that this actually works, right? You need to make sure that the people can take ownership. And what you shouldn't do, and then we have the worst version actually of the manager, which is the micromanager. Let's make this person red. The micromanager is a form of a manager who takes away ownership by telling everyone exactly what to do next. I'm not talking about the why and the value and the potential. I'm talking about every little step here. Exactly prepared, planned, right? Waterfall type plans. It's everything is defined. So you don't need to think about it. You just need to work it down. Code monkeys, ticket machines, those kind of things is then the actual follower who should be a follower of a leader, but isn't, because it's simply a worker node. That's the worst thing you can be in, right? But how do you actually then invoke ownership? So invoke that the person is actually taking it. You actually do that by leaving enough space. So we actually have there's something, let me take a little bit of something where I can draw. So we have the strategic layer. This is now the vertical. We have the tactical layer. And we have the operational layer. So that's important to understand. Operational. Yeah, that's okay. Operational. So actually, this one is a little bit smaller in regular. So it's like a little bit like a pyramid. I know that some people don't like it, but I do it like that right now because this is actually how I experience it myself. Developers are here at this level. This is where devs are. So we have devs here. And we have the typical CTO, CEO is here. And then we have a tactical layer where we have EMs and tech leads of all kinds. Sometimes principal engineers, sometimes even staff engineers. That is very roughly working. This is where business is done. Business decisions, business requirements, head counts, and those kind of things. Tactical implementations is where we actually decide how we bring that into being. And if you are a leadership person, especially a CTO type of leadership person, your responsibility ends somewhere in the middle of tactical. So you influence that with boundaries, but you need to leave enough room that engineering managers and tech leads can take ownership and go to the next level until the half of the operational again, to let enough room for the devs to take ownership there as well. So everyone needs to have his or her fair share to actually do things. So you can't do things, or you can't expect that developers in the end take ownership when those two layers already defined every bit you need to do. That's extremely important, especially in the time of AI, where these guys think that we can actually do that without those. This isn't the case right now, but you can read that everywhere. But there's a tendency in the mindsets of current leaders and leadership groups I am in and those kind of things. So people think about that. It is actually an interesting idea for many people. I personally don't like it because I'm a xennial, a sub-generation, grew up in traditional analog times, and grow up very early on in technology. So I appreciate AI in some way, but I still want to be a human being. And especially newer types of leaders, they don't see this traditional way of life as interesting as it actually is. But it's extremely important to understand this, because with AI, all these things don't matter anymore, because humans don't matter that much anymore. And if you try to bridge the gap between these two layers and devs, and make devs somehow a little bit let's say, not that necessary anymore, they won't take ownership anymore. So that's actually another topic. I'm still wrapping my head around that one. But let's say if AI is not a big thing in your company, then the devs are actually on the operational layer, and they need to take things in terms of ownership, right? When it, for example, comes to, hey, up to when you have a team lead on that level as well, so a typical lead for 2 or 3 or 4 people, for, hey, how do we actually implement this? Even tech stack, sometimes even tech stack, those kind of decisions can be as well. Do we implement it like this? Do we do it like this? So as long as this is inside the boundaries which was defined in the upper areas, that is okay. But you need to leave that. You can't go and say, yeah, just do that, and in the next meeting you rip that apart as a CTO or engineering manager and say that's nonsense, sometimes this toxic kind of stuff. If you do that, you have totally failed as a leader and even as a manager in that moment, because it is equally important to have ownership taken people, or people who took ownership, right, as a manager and a leader. There is not much of a difference there, right? So ownership is important. Ownership makes, so why is ownership important? I never mentioned that. Ownership is important to actually carry the weight from A to B, to have a reason to get to the value. Because if you have ownership in this journey, you have ownership in the value, in the purpose. It's yours as well. So that creates not only bonds, that creates loyalty with your company. So, for example, the journey for a junior person who was an apprentice in your company, learning in 3 years how to code by all the seniors, and took more ownership and more ownership, will stay in the companies for at least 2 to 3 years. I saw that so often. And this is one of the bonuses I want to give in the end. This is what so many newer companies completely ignore. These concepts of how we actually learn and get into a job, give juniors a chance, but don't treat them as full developers yet. So they can't take ownership because the stakes and the complexity where they could take ownership is so high that they simply cannot do that because they are not yet competent enough. And that is pretty unfair in my opinion, but it's a different story. Not a different story. We do that in the end. Okay, let me quickly take a look. I was talking a lot now. Let me quickly quickly look. So I lost the window. Sorry. So momentum, skepticism, change for the sake. Okay, then we actually already get, so last 15 minutes, this is the fourth part, which is juniors versus seniors. So now we have talked about what leadership actually is, and that leadership means to lead people, right, from A to B, and being worth following. So what do you actually need to do to be worth being followed, right? So that you can do this intrinsic motivation stuff, you can manage that the people build up discipline to keep a baseline as a team. That's part of your proactive doing then, keeping the baseline and making sure that this discipline is done. And by that, creating team's credibility. So if you go to the next journey, the team will say, we can't do that. It was great last time. And you will have less resistance then and more muse from the beginning on. This is why high performer teams always perform high as a team, because they are used to this process and they basically reduced resistance quite a lot. And they know about that. That's one of the personal things I can give you now for your personal life, is you need to understand resistance and muse. I will do a stream about that in particular, well, at some point in time as well, more as a life coach thing. Resistance is this thing where you need to understand, first of all, it's not you, it's a voice inside you. It's sometimes called the ego. So the egoistic things you do is most likely because you listen to that voice. So it makes you do bad things. And if you understand this voice, you can detect this voice in the moment when it actually occurs. And then you can make a conscious decision. That's one of the few decisions we actually make in life, because most of the things we do is programmed, right? It's programmed into our cognitive things, wirings, how we work. So we do a lot of things subconsciously. And we think we make decisions, but in reality, we don't make that many decisions, especially when we are not aware of those two things. But detecting resistance and saying, I want to do this now. I want to lose weight now. I want to migrate my tech stack now. I want to get my team into speed now. That is a decision to overcome resistance and follow the muse. So you need to be able to understand the muse, the potential, and the resistance. And then you can make decisions with discipline, of course, right? Otherwise, you don't get there. So if you think that resistance is actually your voice and it's true because Netflix is actually nicer than going into that mission, well, no one can help you in that moment other than you, because you are already totally bound. The only potential you would have is get out of there and then take your potential. That's another thing. Okay. So juniors versus seniors. Now let's get finally to that topic. What I want to say is there is another component when we take a look at this journey. And that is, I already mentioned that, the hard skills. Of course. So you don't realize, I think, most of you, how many teams are actually understaffed. And with understaffed, I don't really mean there are actually too less people, but the team itself isn't really skilled enough to do those journeys anymore efficiently. So they do get things done, but not in this idea of, hey, this is actually going upwards. Upwards can be a more simplified code base. So you reduce complexity. You ongoingly refactor your code bases. So when listening to Dave Farley, to his latest book, right, you will listen to that high-performing teams basically refactor the majority of the code base per year at least once, right? That is only possible when you actually get better in every iteration, because refactoring is an optimization you do ongoingly, and that's actually an improvement. And you can only do this improvement if you have the skills to do that. And typically, a junior developer is not the person who is doing these refactorings on an ongoing basis, because a junior in the first year, in total, starting with the idea of how software engineering works. And this is no offense now, but it is simply the case, right? So let's be honest now. I had the same issues in my so it's not an issue, it's actually simply the reality. You can't do that because you are happy that you have created code. So you don't want to refactor that code, and you don't want to delete that code. None of these things, because there's a little bit of sunken cost fallacy in that moment. You have invested something, and finally you have created it, and you don't want to lose it because you have done it. You're proud of that one, and you can't really say that actually is it now a good thing or a bad thing, because you lack experience in that moment to really say, I have done that several times from several angles. I was talking to other people. I got a lot of feedback about my work in the last 8 or 10 years. So I know that this was actually a good aspect. We can take this, but we need to rewrite this and that, or refactor this and that, or even delete that. You can't really say that because you lack the provision for that in that moment. And now you have then the idea of the senior developer who is actually capable of doing that. So if you would have only a team of senior developers, it would be quite easy to go from A to B, right? But most companies don't have that. Even though you have senior roles, well, people are, that's the same as a manager. It's a role. Are you really a senior in skill and in hard skills is a different story, right? So most people who think they are senior, not most people, so that's wrong now as well, but many people and many teams I saw who was basically hired as a senior role after their 4th year of being developer is a little bit like, it's actually an intermediate developer who's pretty good in what he's doing or she's doing, but is not yet a senior. So a senior is a person who basically can do this code reviewing thing in a way that others actually don't do it. They really think about something in a way that, was that actually a good way how it came to be? Will it be a good thing in the next year? So can we keep it like that? Do we modify it like that? Because there is enough experience in enough projects, even companies, to determine how this thing will evolve in the future, at least a little bit. So it's a form of estimation. Senior developers already can do. So real seniors can do that. And you need to have that type of skill set. And you need to have that type of skill set to transition from A to B. But if you only have senior developers, now talking about real senior developers, who actually can do that work, or even intermediate developers who can push forward and do work self-sufficient, you will have the problem that on some point in time, key players will leave your companies, and they will say, oh, I want to do something different, or they become a manager or whatever, right? They are simply not available anymore, and you need to get new people. And then you start this entire process anew. So the leadership process, you need to get them in, you get them running, and they might have good hard skills, but the hard skills are maybe a little bit different because they have learned it differently. They're different opinions, and then you have a little bit of different. Let's call it different opinions. Sometimes it's even beef, but most of the times it is more like different opinions. And when you have those, you will have problems moving those little steps towards B in this case. And you will see that as a leader as well, which makes sense to think about the following. So instead of having a senior only team, which is actually only working when you have actually enough budget, which is a big problem in the startup in a small to medium-sized base anyway, to have that on an ongoing basis, you should learn again how, and this now speaking as a Xennial again from a traditional space. So my very first thing I have done was actually an apprenticeship. Yeah. An apprenticeship, journeymanship, and then go for what we called back then master, right? So today we call it differently, but it was to the time still the case. So you had, that would be actually the same as the junior, the intermediate developer, and the senior today. And that is actually pretty important for a company because that has something to do with the long-term idea, sustainability, and actually having a future with your own team and a stable knowledge base, which means that there are so many overstretched teams where there's one senior for one little thing on a silo. And when this person leaves or disappears, you have a huge problem. And there are this you don't really get to manage this or lead this correctly, and you need to get to the point where you actually keep this together and don't silo those persons. This is the importance here, is that you actually train your own intermediates and seniors over time, which is very good for loyalty as well as for making sure that you have a very good knowledge transfer. And you actually do that by not hiring junior developers because you can pay them lower salaries and let them work as intermediates or even even senior developers. And to be honest, I see that so often. That's annoying already to see that. I really don't like that. And it doesn't work out, right? So you need to understand that junior developers are still learning developers, and that's totally fine. So if your entire perspective of a company is just 1 year and then we will see, and you hire juniors for that false case, I feel very bad for these juniors in that moment because you will not train them, you will burn them out. That's what you do. You expect things from them they simply cannot deliver. And that's totally fine. They shouldn't be able to. But if you turn that around and really say, juniors are there for learning. They are actually trainees. And they can do things, they can do ownership, and they can work on their skills. And they have a senior developer who is actually guiding them. So one senior, I would say 1 or 2 juniors is always a good relation. So if you have 1 senior, you can have 2 juniors. Or I wouldn't do that with intermediates, just another thing personally, but you can have that kind of relationship. And what you see then is, because time goes by pretty quick, and after 3 to 4 years, you have very sufficient intermediate developers who can basically work totally self-sufficient on this journey from A to B inside the team. So they are already solid contributors who take ownership on a totally regular basis. And you have trained them yourself. And they have, by that process, because you are a great leader in that moment, you have created a lot of things together, on an emotional basis. Those people will stay at least with the next years with you. And this is what I see every time. So if you have 3 years of a training for a person, let's call it apprenticeship, and then this person will at least stay 2 to 3 years until this person say, I actually want to see something different. Sometimes earlier, but very often even later. That is how traditional apprenticeship journeyman things actually work. Today we have too much job hopping. Juniors shouldn't job hop. Juniors should find companies where they are trained to become an actual developer. You are not a developer after 6 months. And you aren't. You are. It takes 1, 2, 3 years at least. No, actually, it takes 3 years until you're really self-sufficient, until you can fix problems which are a certain complexity without needing a hand of someone else, right? And that's totally fine. And if you see that long-term thing in combination as a manager in this case, of course, and be proactive as a leader and lead this entire thing in that way, so you take all the 3 types of developer levels with you on the journey, then you will see that this journey will become a total different thing, because there are people now caring for each other and helping each other out to get to point B. It is not like only seniors who are blaming everyone who's doing a mistake and is a little bit about this. This is oftentimes the case because the more high performance you have in a team, or let's say high performance, the more skilled people you have in a team, the less room for errors or something is there. But if you have a team where learning is normal, then it becomes normal for seniors as well. And if you take that away, then suddenly the pressure is higher, which is not really beneficial when you are a leadership person and you need to get this intrinsic motivation out of the people. So we are still humans, so we are no machines. We are humans and we have those needs. We have social needs, we have reciprocity, those kind of aspects, those kind of cognitive wirings we have, they play a crucial role, and you need to understand those as a leadership person. So you need, this is what we call it, by the way, culture, right? So how to create a great working culture, a tech culture, it is a part of how you actually train the fresh blood, the offspring of the company, right? How to train them to become what you expect them to be. And then they will stay for a while with your company, and you will actually get this value back. You have put it into those people to learn to get to this point, multiple times paid back, because they can now work better than most seniors you would hire from outside. They can work better on your code bases because they have all the domain knowledge, everything you need, what the manager actually likes. They already have that, right? Because they learned it firsthand as the first thing they ever done as a developer. And that is extremely valuable to have. And it's extremely beneficial to have that as a leadership person. Because why do I actually say this? Let me quickly check. Okay, why do I actually say this? Because we have often, let's say, conversations with leadership persons or persons who actually want to be leaders, but they are more like managers and they are overwhelmed with what they do. And the reason for that is they are often, very often, in the case where they understand that's actually a transition from A to B, they have even B in mind, they even have a Y and somehow value, but they don't get the people to get there, because even though they might be able to tell about the potential and they overcome the resistance and they somehow don't really get to B, and they end up somewhere here and closer, and shortcuts, shortcomings, deadlines not met. You shouldn't have deadlines in the form like a deadline-driven approach. That's typical micromanager thing. But basically, that's another part, the trust part, right? Where you, as a leader, you trust that the team is doing its best and it's done when it's done, and you can communicate that in your role as a manager to outside stakeholders. This is a topic for another day, extremely important, but not with a little bit too much for today. But you will be stagnant on this path if you actually cannot do this, because you haven't managed to create a good culture where people work together, and you basically have not the concept of silo. So even if a senior falls out and is not available anymore, then you can actually, with a good intermediate person after 4 years, already substitute this person at least for a while. And you don't need to be afraid as a manager or leadership person that you can't get this thing done anymore. Those kind of things play a role in reality quite a lot, and that is what we see so often out there, which is actually not working, because they either only have juniors and those juniors aren't actually intermediate yet, and there is no senior because the senior is the team lead and needs to code him or herself and is totally overwhelmed with training others or reviewing things others, fixing things of others because they're actually not yet there to do intermediate work, but they are expected to do that. So the senior need to fix this. And this is a recipe for burnout. And this is a recipe to not get be to the point, or it's way lower quality. And that does have, that's a typical recipe for an extended amount of tech that you build as well, especially in startups where you often start with try to get people cheap and try to, especially when you don't pay salaries, that kind of things, where you try to get people to do things because based on promises, but they somehow learn things, but then they make it because they see it as an opportunity to actually start. This isn't healthy for everyone, for anyone, and that will not lead really to that. So for a effective leadership in the technology area, so that context, that domain, it is necessary to have the hard skills and the sustainability in your company. Not only budget. So budget is one thing. Of course, you need to pay that all, but make sure you have a good mix and a good culture. And you do that as a leader as well. Of course, as a manager, you do the hard things, right? But as a leader, you need to make sure it is formed. You need to make sure that the senior understands that we have juniors, we need to train them, and we have intermediates who bear the actual bulk work, right? But the seniors don't code all day long. I've made videos about that. Seniors shouldn't, in such a team, code all day long. Yeah, maybe they do the best coding, but that is not the best for this journey we were talking about. The best for this journey would actually be to enable others to get as soon as possible to do the main work as well. That is the actual job of the seniors, the trainers, right? The people who coach others inside the team, so that everyone in the team can intrinsically be intrinsically motivated to grab potential and move towards that one. Because nothing is more frustrating that you are part of a team and the team is trying to get there and you can't simply do anything to participate here. You can't even take ownership because you don't have the skills and no one is teaching you and everyone is acting like you need to do this, because you lose control in that moment, and control or losing control is basically burnout in the long run. You burn out because you lose control over the things, which makes you this is a downward spiral into anxiety, and you can't sleep because of that. You don't want to go to work anymore. And if you as a leader let that happen in your team, you are not a leadership person. You don't lead people anywhere. You just manage them to the bottom. That is what you do. And this is what I meant in the beginning. The pure reactive part is the manager, but you need to be the proactive part to make sure those things don't happen. And this is not really managing. You don't manage those things. Don't get me wrong, you don't manage. This is totally personal. This is based on this pattern. This relationship between, oh my God, I just cried. Yeah, now it's working again. It is based on this relationship between the leader and the followers. If the followers trust the leader, you have done everything right. If that has already happened, then seniors will trust juniors and vice versa, because seniors lead juniors as well, and intermediates as well. So there is this entire thing. You are the example, is basically copied and duplicated in the entire team. That is what you do as a leader. And that is the reason why you as a leader, in the middle of a journey, you could disappear, because you have created enough momentum to get the entire team to the potential itself, because they overcome resistance. They have enough intrinsic motivation because they listen to the muse. They have built up enough virtues, aka discipline, to keep their baseline, and have enough credibility for themselves to even go that route without you. So if you as a leader, you need to be in place to go the entire route. And without you, nothing happens. So you are the bottleneck. You are not a leader. You are a micromanager. So that is from the other side. And this is, I think, now a good roundup for the topic today, because I think I've explained everything. I probably go and do something regarding in an article about that, or maybe something like that, because it is actually a very interesting package. And those are, in my opinion, the very basics. There are a lot of things you can put on top of that. You can even implement systems to make that even easier to acquire. But this is those are the basics. Those are the emotional patterns, the relations, the cognitive workflows in our head, the wirings we have, and what you should do and what you shouldn't do, especially not becoming that type of micromanagement person, because you want to be that one, the leadership person who does all the interesting things and bring people always from A to B. And if you see that there's something wrong, you basically do it and take a look where it actually, because you have understood everything, and then you go inside there and you know exactly what you need to do, exactly what you need to say to others, what you need to display to others in order to get that done. But as I said in the beginning, the very first thing you need to work on is your own credibility, because that starts down there. If you have that, you have already done that for yourself as well. So you have that, and you can be this role model. Maybe you have heard of that. You need to be a role model. That is exactly that. This had nothing to do with the manager. That's to do with the person the people follow, the relation again. I hope that helped. I was streaming today to some person. That was interesting, actually, to see. Okay, let me know in the comments or afterwards in DMs how that actually was, working for you. And let me quickly take a look how I can fix that. I first time used this program today. And what I want to do in the next week, so I want to do that once a week, this type of stream about leadership topics, about management topics, about resistance and muse topics, or personal topics, all in the context of tech and basically tech and development leadership, because I think that's one of the things I've come across so often, problems we could solve. And I see a lot of posts out there which are actually interesting and they are correct, but they don't really explain why. And this is, of course, often packed in some form of coaching sessions or something like that, even though maybe, right? Maybe there is a solution, but the actual solution is always to understand. The first steps you should do is to understand why that all happens, right? What is the mechanic behind the humans? And you need to understand the human. It's why I wrote yesterday, again, because it was a repost actually, that soft skills or human skills, let's call them human skills, are more important than tech skills or hard skills. Why? Because it all starts with soft skills or human skills. And then over time, we make sure we have the hard skills, or as a prerequisite from the management part. So you have multiple angles where you can reactively make sure that you have enough hard skills to do that, right? And the soft skills, the culture, human skills, the communication skills, the leadership you have, determines if you can actually make those transitions from A to B, A to B, A to B, A to B. Stay in this cycle, feedback cycle. Continuous delivery is, by the way, a very good technical or tactical implementation for these kinds of work, also maybe operational as well, because you can do this leadership stuff inside a agile workflow with continuous delivery. And not talking about agile systems, talking about original agile in that moment. So it is very compatible with a style where a team works closely together, not so much because of Scrum or something like closely together with a leadership person in the center, and you work towards a goal, and then you get to the next thing. The next thing can be an hour, it can be a day, it can be a week. Okay, I hope that helped. I wish you a great day. See you next time, and thank you for tuning in and listening to that stream. See you next week on